UCF needed a win versus BYU, but the Knights couldn't get it done.
You are Locked On UCF, your daily podcast on the UCF Knights, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on in to Locked On UCF, your daily UCF podcast. I'm your host, Mike G, and thank you so much for making Locked On UCF your first listen of every day. For the first word on this loss to BYU from the last word on sports is my good friend, Andrew Gluchov. Happy Monday, Andrew. BYU toppled the Knights. I didn't see this one coming. Andrew, I didn't see this one coming. BYU wins what was a close game for most of it, 81-75. Saunders shined for BYU here with a pretty even game, 11 points in the first half, 11 points in the second half, 8 of 14 from the field. UCF did not have an answer for him. This one stings. And at this point, I'm not sure how, if you're UCF, with the depth that you have, that you find wins down the stretch against what we've already noted in previous episodes is a very tough Big 12 schedule.
Yeah, and BYU got hot at the right moment. They've won 5 out of the last 6, and their one loss was a 1-pointer in overtime against Utah. So they, coming into this week, we talked about how BYU had no quad 1 victories. Well, now they have 2 of them.
Yeah,
they got one against Cincinnati. They got one against Baylor, and depending on where UCF falls, that could be classified as a third one. It really depends. I'm sorry, Cincinnati's a quad 2, UCF and Baylor are the quad 1s. Where Cincinnati falls could change that, because the way it works for those who don't know, for home games, it's 1 through 30. That's a quad 1. For neutral courts, it's 1 through 50. And for road games, it's 1 through 75. So if you're 74th, if you're the opponent and you're playing on the road, that's a quad 1 victory. So UCF still has more opportunities to get some quad 1 wins. TCU has fallen to 78th. They're currently outside of quad 1. But coming up, Cincinnati and Baylor this week, and we talked about UCF needs to basically win them all at this point. The Iowa State game, they with help, they could squeak away with the loss there, but they need help. They're currently starting to fall on the outside looking in. A lot of the bracketologists haven't updated their numbers since this game, but the ones who have, you're starting to see UCF falling outside of that last 4 into the first 4 out. It's starting to get a little bit murky, but we'll talk a little more in depth on each one in just a bit.
Yeah. I want to talk about their tournament chances in the next segment. But as far as this game is concerned, Keyshawn Hall, who has been an absolute rock star for UCF on the basketball court here the last few games, he had an okay game. He just didn't produce much offensively in the first half of this one. As a matter of fact, he only got up 2 shots in the first half, 1 of 2 from the field in the first half for Keyshawn Hall. Darius Johnson, a very tough 4 for 11 from the field in the first half. Look, UCF did not shoot the 3 well in this game.
No, and they couldn't take advantage of the fact that BYU couldn't hit free throws to save their life, barely over 50%. The thing that's interesting is, much like in the last game, UCF went cold late. They once again had no contributions from the bench, essentially, very, very little. I think they came out with 6 points on the bench. And you can't win games like this, especially you're getting to the latter part of the season. Players are running out of gas. You had Darius Johnson, who had foul trouble for most of this game. And that's one reason why he actually played less than 30 minutes, which was a bit of a surprise, when you hear about it going in. But after the fact, you realize he had foul trouble. So that allowed more playing, but you can't get by when you don't have depth, and UCF's proven that their bench just isn't there. Benny Williams was able to take up some minutes, but he didn't do anything. As far as he didn't score anything, didn't shoot anything. Had some defense, but you're dealing with a team that scores as much as you. BYU averages 81 points. They scored 81 points. UCF averages 89 or 79. They scored 75. So you got to find some offense. You knew this is a team that can hit the three and get very hot. And that's what they did, especially in the second half. BYU's second half, they shot 50% from the field and just, finished incredibly strong. A couple of really key blocks by Keba Keita at the end of the game that certainly rubbed some people the wrong way. But hey, I'm not here to one thing or another about the quality of Big 12 officiating. I knew going in to the Big 12, they're notoriously known for bad officiating, especially in football. But here's the thing. You got to make your shots. If you don't make your shots, it doesn't matter. You can't rely on the whistle to win the game.
And I do want to say this, sticking with what you said about the bench and depth, right? Like we noted when we talked about the Kansas loss that looked like it could have been a win, oh so close, but only 2 points from the bench, only 6 points from the bench in this one. It feels like depth is going to continue to haunt UCF here down the stretch. And, what looked like maybe a promising, tournament team on that back end is kind of slipping away from them. And it's unfortunate, but you just don't have the depth to hang with a lot of opponents. Look, if you've got enough talent to take Kansas down to the wire, you have enough talent to beat BYU. And this is no shade to the Cougars, right? I mean, my guy Saunders did his thing in this game. However, this was a winnable game by UCF. You had this one at home. They had to come away with the win here.
Well, what makes this, this game, Kansas, Houston, even Arizona to extent, because they kept that game close, is this team does not have a killer instinct to win these close games.
Yeah.
While they did beat Texas Tech, they had a huge lead on Texas Tech. It was like 20 points, and then they got whittled away and barely walked away with it. This team lacks the killer instinct, and you're seeing it here. You got players like a Hunter Dickinson from Kansas who has the killer instinct and just laid into them late in the second half, wore them down and started scoring at will. There's no different than what happened here. They struggled at being able to deal with the pressure of falling behind late. You saw passing kind of disappear. And let's be honest, we saw how many assists on the game? 10 versus BYU's 22. So UCF's not moving the ball particularly well either. You have a lot of guys who are just kind of just doing their own thing. And as a result, you're not making shots because you're not getting the real great look. You're hitting 37%. That means you got to move the ball a little bit more and try to find your spot instead of just drive in and just try to push something in. Keyshawn Hall got hot late in the game, but you can't expect that to work. You got to be able to move the ball. You got to be able to play team ball. Once again, UCF on the defensive glass just was not having it. They got out rebounded 34-26. It was 34-40 overall. 34-26 was the defensive board numbers. And while UCF created a lot of turnovers, didn't convert enough of them. You outsteal and you outblock, but you don't outscore. You did something wrong.
They scored 18 points off turnovers in this game versus only 8 for BYU. There were some opportunities there. Obviously, they did not take advantage of enough of them down the stretch. Some final numbers before we move on. UCF finished shooting only 37% from the field. We mentioned 31% from three in this one. They hit their free throws, 21 of 25 from the free throw line. So they shot a few more free throws than BYU was only 11 of 19 from the free throw line. Points in the paint, pretty even, 28-26. BYU with a slight edge there. And ultimately what it comes down to, you talked about the movement of the basketball, only 10 assists in this game for UCF versus 22 for BYU. They moved it. They scored when they had to. They came away with the win. But look, what does this do to their tournament chances? You talked a little bit about in the first segment. We're going to go more in depth right after a quick word from our sponsors. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, Andrew. Look, Vegas had this one pretty much as a toss-up. And I bet the money line on UCF and lost. So there was that. Who would you have bet in this one?
Well, I would have taken UCF on this. It was 1.5. I thought they, would take advantage of the home court advantage. I did not expect this to be a loss.
Look, we would have bet UCF. We didn't win. But look. The Super Bowl is here. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities. So another chance for you to bet. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss. FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. On some sites, you can even bet over-under on the national anthem. I always think that's an interesting bet there, Andrew. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's the icing on the cake. Download the app and head over to FanDuel.com to get started. Just $5, and you'll win if you score, and you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Tournament odds. Look, again, you hit on it. You hit on what they had to do. We both said if they lost this game, their tournament odds would take a hit. How much of a hit did they take here, Andrew?
Oh, this one hurts. They going in a number of them, they were last 4 in. Now they're first 4 out, and there's no margin of error here. The only ones that haven't really changed that are the ones that haven't updated. CBS actually had UCF in the dance going into this game. They're now not even in the first 4. They've dropped out completely there. BYU's taking advantage. They're still in the last first 4 out in a number of different bracketologies. But the truth is, they're on the outside looking in, and they have no margin of error. What saves them is their strength of schedule. It's certainly not their net rankings, which have really kind of just languished in the 60s, because they're not taking advantage of these opportunities to win ahead of themselves. Like BYU was ranked in the top 40, and that would have been a good size quad 2 win for them. They didn't do it. They gave BYU a quad 1, which now takes a spot away, because the estimates, because of how great the SEC's been. Now, normally the Big 12 could easily get 10 teams in the tournament, but no one expected the Spanish League position, i.e. no one expected the SEC to have such an amazing run where you have potentially 13 teams in the tournament. That means at-larges are being taken away, including the Big 12. So they're maybe 8 out of the Big 12, and UCF's just falling behind down in that 9-10 spot where they may not be going dancing if this doesn't get any better.
Yeah, there's a point I want to make too. You talked about the SEC getting a bunch of teams in. Obviously, they're doing really good in basketball this year. However, it's not just that, Andrew. It's once conference tournament time comes, there are going to be a couple in these lesser-known conferences, conference champions that nobody expects. Guys who are already in the tournament, who they're going to win their conference champions, they're going to take that auto qualifier from being a conference champion, and it's going to knock somebody in the bubble off the bubble. So if you were UCF, you win this game, and you want to get as far away from that madness as possible, because when these outlier conference champions start happening, because there's a few every year, some team that wouldn't have made the tournament other than winning their conference tournament. You take a spot from somebody who maybe has the resume, but it's a crowded field when you're going by resume, and it's going to knock you out of the tournament. I think your UCF, you lose to BYU, you bring that conversation in to the discussion, and it just sucks because they've got the talent. I think they could be a very entertaining tournament team, Andrew, if they got in. And they may not have the depth, but the great thing about the NCAA tournament is you just have to be the best for the day. And you're not telling me that this UCF team can't on any day come out and challenge the top teams in college basketball. This is going to sound like over the top homerism, but hear me out. We saw them battle Kansas to, just so close. They were in there, man. We've seen them do it multiple times this year with top 10 teams. Come on, man. If I'm still holding out hope that they can go on a run down this stretch. Now, the marquee win may not be there. How many games are left on the schedule here? Help me out.
Start counting. Let's see. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 games left on the schedule.
10 opportunities, right? If you win 8 of them, I think you get into the tournament. I think UCF.
I don't know. It depends. Well, I mean, it also depends on who you lose to. If you lose to Iowa State,
you got Iowa State left, right?
And you win the rest of them, you got a chance.
Okay, all right.
You're gonna need a little bit of help. You're gonna need some help because there's some good teams. Like you look at ESPN's bracketology now; it's a little outdated. It still has UCF in because it was done before the game. But who was the second? So UCF still was the last team in. Who's the next to last team? North Carolina. You've got Pitt is in the last 4 buys, and so is Texas. I mean, you've got some teams that have some clout, have some buying power that could sway the committee over an upstart like UCF. I mean, you look behind them. You have Xavier, and obviously BYU is going to jump them. SMU, who's actually having a pretty good year. They're around 40, 41 in the net, better than UCF's position.
41,
so
yeah.
There are teams that are right there that can easily jump a UCF. So they need that at least not so much marquee win. They don't have to beat Iowa State. But they can't afford to lay down because it's their close fought games that give them the human element vote. Number wise, no way. You're in the 60s in the net. You're not getting it. But because of the wins they've had against Quad 1, the tough games they've put up against other Quad 1 teams, and the committee watches that, they notice that. That's why they're still in the conversation. So if they can stay, close with Iowa State, and it's a home game, there's potential, but they have to win out the rest of the games. They have to be Cincinnati. They need that Quad 1 win against Baylor, and it's a golden opportunity. And then you have a chance for another Quad 1 win against West Virginia to close out the season. You got to win those Quad 1 games. The only way to differentiate yourself. However, on the flip side, you cannot afford a bad loss, and UCF has to play Colorado and Oklahoma State, who both, in the case of Oklahoma State, they got to win both those. Yeah, both of those teams have net over 100. Yeah. That is a bad loss.
Bad loss. Yeah,
if they drop that. Utah and Kansas State in the 80s, that's still a bad loss. They can't afford those, so they got to basically win out outside of Iowa State, and they can't lay down and die against the Cyclones. Otherwise, they've used up the goodwill that they've built up.
Yeah, look, it's hard looking at a team like North Carolina who's 1-9 in Quad 1 games,
and they're still. But that's
still
in
the conversation. Yeah, but
that's that blue blood status.
It is
keeping them in the conversation, and why they have some value that UCF doesn't have because they don't have that history of being able to sway the committee.
Yeah, agreed. Look, there's riveting stuff here. I can't wait to see how it ends up. We're going to be watching every single game down the stretch. They got 10 games left. That's 10 opportunities to play like a champion. We'll see if the Knights can do it. But look, we're going to talk some football. They released odds to win the championship in the Big 12, to win the whole thing. Arizona State battled against the odds. Let's talk about UCF's championship odds in our next segment. Andrew, UCF opened plus 50,000.
Not good.
Right? Plus 50,000 to win the national championship from the Big 12. Utah leads the pack at plus 25,000. Have we not learned our lesson with Utah? Have we not learned our lesson?
I don't know. That doesn't make any sense.
Right. I don't know what they see. They were picked to win the whole Big 12 last year.
Yeah, and they fell on their face.
Yeah, so I don't get it. I'm not getting the Utah love, but hey, UCF, joins a group of schools in that plus 50,000: Texas Tech, Colorado, West Virginia, BYU, Houston, also down there in the plus 50,000 range. And to finish that out, you've got Houston plus 100,000. Oklahoma State plus 100,000, Arizona plus 200,000, and Cincinnati plus 200,000. So, look, they're a long shot, to say the least. I know we talked about FanDuel in the first segment, but one of my favorite things to do
is to spend money on stuff that has long shots of winning.
Well, was to
what?
bet on my alma mater in the preseason to win the national title. I would put $100. After college, I moved to Vegas, Andrew, and I would bet $100 on my alma mater to win it. And for those of you watching, most of you guys know I'm an Auburn grad. Love covering UCF, but I am an Auburn grad. And my job moved me to Arizona in 2010. And so because I wasn't in Vegas and online gambling had been outlawed, I didn't place my bet, and they won the whole thing. Auburn was plus 100,000 to win that year. So I lost out on a lot of money that year. I love telling that story. It's so sad. And then I got my bet in for 2013, and they lost in epic fashion to Florida State. So there's that. But look, Arizona State was a long shot going into last Big 12 season, right? And they won it, and they made the first 12-team playoff. And not only did they make it, Andrew, they probably gave us the most entertaining game of the playoffs with Texas. The stars shined in that one. Ultimately, Quinn Ewers came through and led his team to the win at the end. But boy, did Arizona State give them a run for their money. Can UCF be 2025's Arizona State under Scott Frost?
Not this year.
No, okay, all right. I mean,
there's no Cam Scattaboo on this team.
Remember, I don't know.
That guy graduated already.
He did. RJ Harvey graduated. However, they had Arizona State picked at the bottom of the Big 12 dead last. The media said, "You are the worst. Congratulations. Here's your trophy." And they defied all odds and went and won the whole thing. Did people? Scattaboo's a great back, but I'm not sure people expected the season from him that he produced last year.
I mean, he had a good year the prior year before, but I mean, he's the guy who spent half his year in the lower division FCS. So he was kind of still somewhat of an unknown. That's why he didn't storm onto the Heisman race until very late. So no one gave Arizona State a chance. They had a rough year in 2023. Kenny Dillingham was still learning the ropes there and really settled in. I mean, he's become kind of a fan favorite by a lot of people for his passion and whatnot. They had an amazing run, but now people are paying attention. Yeah, and we'll see. The schedule actually drops Tuesday at noon. So depending on when you're listening to this show, the schedule may or may not already come out, and we will be talking about it.
Yes, we will.
And how UCF's fate falls in it. Now, here's the thing. When we looked at the 2024 schedule, it on paper, when it first came out, looked incredibly favorable because you had an out-of-conference schedule that wasn't terribly difficult. You had a Florida team that looked like it was practically dead. And then you had Arizona State. And Arizona was the team everyone was worried about. Arizona State, Colorado is, coming off a rough year in Deion Sanders' first year. So there was high expectations. No one expected the top four teams in the Big 12 ending up being on UCF's schedule. And that's what ended up happening with BYU and Arizona State and Colorado. And the fact that it played out the way it did was just absolutely amazing. And, just no one saw it coming. I sure didn't. I expected more out of UCF season than what came out of it. Also, no one expected the struggles that Gus Malzahn had, and basically the team falling apart all around him, including his job at UCF, which he had later left for Florida State. did anyone really see that playing out the way it did? I don't think so.
Yeah. Look, I know they're a long shot. And, when we start talking about championships, we really start getting into fantasy land. However, we talked about floor and ceiling. I do feel like they have a chance to exceed that ceiling if the right pieces fall into place. We'll see what UCF is able to do in the second portal window, Andrew, to see if there's some key pieces. Maybe there's a player or two that nobody expects that develops under Scott Frost that this staff will utilize, and maybe your next Cameron Scattaboo is there. We don't know.
Very possible. We don't know.
Yeah, but that's why they play the games, and that's why we cover it. Andrew, I want to thank you for joining me tonight. Before we get out of here, tell people where they can find you.
Well, you can catch me on Twitter/X or Blue Sky at StatBoyDrew, and you can catch my writing on The Last Word on College Football, a part of The Last Word on Sports family.
Thank you so much for giving Locked On UCF your first listen of the day. For your second listen, head on over to Locked On Big 12. Our guy Drake Toll leads the conversation in conference realignment news and pulls no punches when it comes to talking about every team in the Big 12, including the UCF Knights. You can find Locked On Big 12 on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, and you can find us here tomorrow on Locked On UCF.